So hello and welcome to a new episode of Sustainable Conversations. My name is Olivia Hart and I'm the Senior Researcher for our Legal 500 Global Green Guide. I'm kindly joined here today by Yong Hu, who is a partner at Rajah Tann, Singapore. And he'll be sharing his extensive knowledge with us today on the energy transition in Southeast Asia. Yong Hui's key practices are in construction and projects, energy and resources, and international arbitration. He specializes in project and front-to-end construction work and has experience in drafting procurement, construction, engineering, consultancy, concession, privatization, dismantling, and maintenance contracts. His projects include advising Facebook on the development of its first data center in Asia, advising a consortium on its successful bid for the development of a seawater desalination plant on Jurong Island, and advising Nesta on the proposed expansion of its refinery plant in Singapore. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So let's just dive straight into it.
Sure, Olivia.
What are some of the key factors driving the energy transition in the ASEAN region?
Well, there are few key factors. First, there's increasing energy demand. So just for context, ASEAN will have 723 million people by 2030, making it one of the largest regions in the world by population. We are expecting 4.5% annual GDP growth across the region over the next decade. And we will also see a 60% growth in energy demand from now until 2040. So you would see that there is such growth, and that's coupled with increasing energy demand, especially for large population bases such as Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. The next concern is really about energy security. So ASEAN presently imports about 40% of its primary energy supply, fossil fuels, from other jurisdictions. And at the same time, there is concern that this percentage may increase because of the increasing energy demand, as well as due to depleting fossil fuel production and supplies within ASEAN itself. So this makes the ASEAN countries vulnerable to supply disruptions and price volatility, as we have seen recently. So transiting to a more diverse and locally sourced energy source, such as renewable energies, would definitely help improve their security and reduce their dependence. So there are also the other issues with regards to climate change, it being very present and being aware in the minds of the ASEAN, because they are often very affected. So there's a lot of coastal nations, low-lying areas, and therefore rising sea levels and extreme weather events and more frequent natural disasters due to climate change actually directly impact the population, and hence provides a political will to try and manage this issue. The other issues also with regards to decreasing costs of such technologies, especially for solar and wind power. So that makes it increasingly competitive with traditional fossil fuel sources and makes it more economically viable. And last, you would see that many countries in ASEAN have started to implement policies and incentives such as tax incentives, and also putting in place renewable energy targets, which provide a framework for this to go through. And ASEAN as a whole itself also has a framework and a plan and vision to push for renewable energies. So those are the key factors that I've seen.
Thank you. And which type of projects are most prevalent in the current market?
Well, presently, as of now, what we've seen being the most prevalent would actually be solar energy. Well, it could be across the different types of solar energy, from utility scale over to rooftop, and even for floating solar, where land may be more limited commodity, such as in Singapore. The next type of projects that we commonly see are wind projects, especially offshore wind. Countries like Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam have rich wind resources. And you would also see that because of these intermittent sources of electricity, there's also an increasing demand for battery energy storage systems, especially when I'm thinking about utility scale, this kind of renewable projects. We will need these systems in order to mitigate the issues arising from the fluctuating outputs of these types of renewable energy. The one that has been in the top of the market has also been hydrogen-related projects, but those are still in its infancy. They're still being explored and being studied on what's the most suitable way forward, such as whether it might be using a medium such as ammonia. And last, ASEAN has traditionally developed a good number of hydroelectric dams and power plants. So there's always interest on that front. But I would say that the sites and water bodies which have not been utilized, it's becoming quite limited.
And what are some of the key challenges to investment and development of more renewable projects in ASEAN?
Well, ASEAN as a whole has a lot of potential, but at the same time, it is a developing region. So the challenges are quite common when we start thinking about infrastructure projects as well as PPP type projects. So one of the challenges facing for renewable energy is actually the lack of clear and detailed policy and regulatory frameworks, particular to renewable energy, right? They may have visions, they may have plans, but when it comes to implementation and having detailed policies, that may differ. And ASEAN as a whole is made up of many countries, and at the same time, each of these countries may have their own regional governments, which they may or may not adhere directly to the vision, which increases uncertainty for the investors and the developers. Regulatory frameworks, such as complex permitting processes and also inadequate grid infrastructure to deal with renewable energy, these are also barriers and challenges. The next one we commonly hear about would actually be financing and investment barriers. Financing now has become more expensive. Credit is not as free and not as available as it was during the COVID years. Investors are potentially more hesitant, especially when you start thinking about perceived risks with the region, including political risk. Right? So there is a concern or challenges with regards to bankability of some of these projects. The next one would actually be technical and operational challenges, right? Just to ensure that we have the right personnel who are able to undertake and implement such projects. In many of these countries, because it's a developing area of work, capacity and institutional capacity still has to be improved. And the last issue is that one we see across most developing nations is the issue of land. Right? All of these projects require substantial amount of land. If you're thinking of a solar utility project, you need a very large, unutilized, hopefully flat piece of land. Right? And securing of land and ensuring that title to the land is unencumbered and clear, well, that's often a challenge in many of our jurisdictions in ASEAN.
Great. So I understand Singapore plans to import renewable energy, and there are some plans for an ASEAN power grid. Could you provide an update on the status and what you view as key legal challenges to such projects?
Well, what we call the ASEAN Power Grid is an initiative by ASEAN itself to construct a regional power interconnection between the region. So it envisions a step-by-step process, right? First on a cross-border bilateral process, and then hopefully expanding to a sub-regional process and the ultimate goal of a totally integrated power grid system. The intent is really to enhance electricity trade across the region so as to better meet rising electricity demand and also to improve access to electricity services across the region. So that's the goal. And we have been taking steps on that front. So first, the countries have announced their commitment to initiate up to 100 megawatts of cross-border power trade from Laos to Singapore via Thailand and Malaysia. So these are projects which will involve interconnection between domestic power lines, and that would actually be one of the key challenges, right? Having that regulatory framework and then regulating how the import, export, and pricing of the electricity is done. The other key news that has come out recently is that EMA has the Energy Market Authority of Singapore has granted a conditional approval to one of our Singapore companies to import a gigawatt of electricity from Cambodia to Singapore. And this is actually the first one. So this is a significant milestone because Singapore has goals to import up to 4 megawatts of low carbon electricity from the region, through this ASEAN power grid. So in that particular project, it envisions that it would actually encompass the whole range of renewable energies, solar energy, hydropower, potentially wind power. And as I mentioned, these are all then will need to be supported by battery energy storage systems. And there are a few ways to go about such projects, right? It could be through, as I mentioned on the first MOU, which is through direct overland links through the power grid. But for this particular project, which has the conditional approval, it's being transmitted via subsea cables from Cambodia to Singapore, which are more than 1,000 kilometers. So that directly poses a technical challenge. And we think about subsea cables, they are not new to us, but they do require substantial investment. And then we will see challenges, and hopefully they'll be able to get financing for that particular project. There are other MOUs in place. We have an MOU between Singapore and Indonesia on the import of electricity, likewise between Cambodia and Singapore. So as you can see, we are taking steps on that front. The bilateral stage is being put in place. The sub-regional is forming, and then hopefully in the not too distant future, we will achieve that ASEAN power grid. So the key challenges is also about, as I said, it's really about investment, right? It's about some of our less development member states, they may not have the deep or the sufficient foreign currency market, as well as the financing market in order to support such projects. So, it's quite interesting to see where the financing for these projects will come from. And the next, as I mentioned, it's really about the cables and the interconnections, as well as having that regulatory framework so that we can ensure that all the parties' interests are aligned and protected.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for all your really invaluable insights on this very important topic. And thank you so much for your time as well. And it's been a real pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you for the opportunity.